Jeff Weaver, Bernie Sanders' former campaign manager, is either incompetent or he is part of the political system, potentially both. Now, I don't necessarily mean to be brutal in this case. I strongly suspect it's the former and the latter, meaning I strongly suspect it's a bit of both. But I'm tired of the charade. I'm tired of this pretending that our political device and our political system in any way is representative of what the public wants, Democrat or, for that matter, Republican. In both situations, you basically have one party that has two wings that we keep pretending as if these things are somehow fundamentally different when they are not. Weaver has sounded the alarm. And in sounding the alarm, he's basically saying, oh my God, Joe Biden is losing lefty and progressive support. Now, Weaver immediately left Bernie Sanders and formed a super PAC. Now, originally, the super PAC was named something more closely related to the Sanders campaign, but he was forced to change it because it goes against Sanders' brand being against super PACs. America's Promise PAC. That's basically what Jeff Weaver is now running. And Jeff Weaver sounding this alarm, he said something as a quote in this article. And I thought, that is not how politics works. And if that is the level to which you are working, you are not doing politics, you're doing sheepdogging. There's a dramatic difference in those two things. If your goal and your objective is really to get policy accomplished, if that's where you stand, where everything else is subordinate to get that particular policy accomplished, then this is not the way you behave. This is the way you behave if everything else is subordinate to get the Democratic Party and Joe Biden in office. There is a difference in those things. Those two things are not tethered to one another. They are not intrinsically linked. You either want policy or you want the party. There's sometimes they coincide, but for the last 40 years, they have not. And it's time to do something different. If Jeff Weaver, honest to God, believes what he's saying here, and this is not some, ploy at modest politics in order to kind of try to push Joe Biden on a policy here or there, then he is really incompetent and he doesn't quite understand politics. And it makes all the sense in the world why Sanders lost in 2016 and why Sanders lost in 2020. I'm not blaming Weaver entirely for that loss because Sanders made the decisions that Sanders wanted to make. Fair enough. But this level of politics and what he believes to be politics is just sheepdogging. There's no politics to this. He created a super PAC to take a huge amount of cash to con people that is against politicians taking cash from these dark money sources to vote for one Joe Biden who in no way represents their policy interests. That's what's taking place. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. But this pissed me off, if I'm being pretty honest with you. Like I said, I'm tired of the charade. We go through this political process every 4 years. We pretend that the candidates who are promising this or promising that are actually going to do those things when they get in office, or if that is even going to be their intention. The left, for 40 years, pretends as if that lumping themselves in this kind of cowardly way is somehow a noble act that will, at some point, get the Democratic Party to give them something in regards to policy concessions. It is the weirdest thing in the world that we are pretending these things. The reality of it is your political system, your political device is no longer connected to the public. Pretend as you may. And yeah, you may have this kind of tribal politics as like rah-rah Democrat, rah-rah Republican. But for the last 40 years, most of the time, you have put somebody in office because of who they weren't. Oh, in this very specific case, Weaver is basically complaining that, oh my God, Joe Biden is losing lefties. And Joe Biden is going to lose this race if he don't get enough lefties. Right here. There's a real and urgent need to help Biden consolidate Sanders supporters, Weaver wrote. If all of Sanders' base turns out for Joe Biden in November, he could defeat Donald Trump and take back the White House for Democrats. Here's the problem. Significant portions don't currently plan to do that. 20% of Sanders supporters say they do not intend to vote for Joe Biden. About 60% say they're not excited by supporting his nomination. Meanwhile, Pew Research survey found that 47% of Sanders supporters said that the difference between Biden and Sanders will keep the party from uniting behind the presumptive nominee. 47%, that's almost half. Now, Weaver says the following. Treating Sanders supporters as if they're throwaway voters will ultimately be at the expense of the party, down ballot candidates, and our ability to enact real policy solutions for America. You honestly believe that Joe Biden is looking for real policy solutions? Despite best intentions, the Biden campaign and the Democratic National Committee are far behind on digital organizing, Latino outreach, and progressive coalition building, all critical to reaching and winning over Sanders supporters, he added. This is a slap in the face. Winnie Wong, when asked about this, basically said it is a slap in the face for people working with Sanders at a high level to turn around and create a super PAC that turns around and basically tries to get people, progressives, lefties, who backed all of these policy ideas, all of these policy agendas. They weren't in this just because they thought Sanders was attractive or cute or, had ripped abs or whatever. No, they were backing this entirely for policy. And in backing this particular person entirely for policy, you have another candidate that was running entirely on electability. Policy wasn't necessary. And now Weaver has basically turned around, created a super PAC that basically repudiates everything all of these lefties backed and believed in who were backing for Sanders, and directly aims that super PAC at Sanders supporters to get them to back Joe Biden for nothing. For nothing. You got nothing in that process. And based on nothing in that process, you want those people to back for Joe Biden? Yes, that is a slap in the face. And not just a slap in the face, it is bad politics. There are two interlinking points here. Now, because I don't want to keep this video long, but it is a slap in the face. It is utter betrayal of the left in this case. You got nothing out of this political process. And despite getting nothing out of this political process, you're basically asking for everything for Joe Biden. The reality of it is, this is not how politics works. This is just not how politics works. How many people did you have backing Sanders? 20, 30 million people. If indeed your objective was to have this policy agenda that you want to accomplish, that I hear Bernie Sanders bitching about constantly, if that is indeed your real intention, beyond anything else, where everything else is subordinate, you would have used that 20, 30, 40 million people, how many ever people that gave that $250 million, you would have had all of those people in line saying, you get our support when you back our policies. And if you don't back our policies, you don't get our support. And you will ask the very basic question that should have been asked for the last 40 years. If the Democratic Party is so terrified of Trump, if Trump really is this ogre that is going to be the apocalypse, if he is really going to fundamentally destroy and alter this country, you are telling me that beating him is less important than accepting these policy concessions? Meaning you are literally willing to lose to Trump as opposed to accept policy concessions. But you argue that this man is the apocalypse. How weird is that? That's kind of like somebody saying, I believe in science from the standpoint of the environmental movement, but will back oil companies and oil pipelines. Meaning you can't have it both ways. There's a logical inconsistency in saying Donald Trump is the apocalypse. However, we don't want to accept Medicare for all, something that has 88% Democrat support, in order to get Joe Biden elected. Which one do you care about more? Beating Trump or the policy concessions? Because it seems that you care more about the policy concessions than beating Trump. That's politics. That's you bringing together your coalition, realizing after 2020 that there's a fundamental difference between the people who are backing Sanders and the Democratic Party. You must and should have taken your coalition and held that coalition together as a block, just like they do in every other country from the standpoint of a parliament, and hold that block and say, this is what we want. This is what the American public want. Do your job. If you're willing to do your job, you get the support. That's politics. That's how politics works. Politics works on leverage, not you on your knees putting out posts like this begging Joe Biden to basically pick something up from the standpoint of a policy agenda. That's not politics at all. That's just weakness. And this PAC that you're engaged in that gets nothing is trying to con lefties into that party. That's sheepdogging. That's not politics. There's a difference in those things. The second part to that is that it's not even smart. If indeed your objective was to get Joe Biden elected, your issue, and the reason you're writing this, is that you are having difficulty getting lefties to back Joe Biden. Now, that's what you are saying, but you're not really saying it honestly. You're not expressing the entirety of it honestly. What you are saying, the honesty, the reality of it is, your issue is, how do we get lefties to back Joe Biden since Joe Biden is not giving them anything? Meaning, the issue is not how do you get lefties to back Joe Biden. You could do that You have Sanders' agenda right around the thing. If Joe Biden accepted every last one of those agenda pieces, Joe Biden would get the right-wing Democrat support and the left-wing Democrat support. He would win, despite the rape allegation. But you don't want to do that because you know Joe Biden is not going to do that. So your issue is basically, how do we get lefties to back Joe Biden when we know Joe Biden is not giving anything from the standpoint of policy that they want and they support? That's your issue. And that's the issue of conning. This is kind of my point about the sheepdogging thing. If you wanted to get Joe Biden elected, the way you would have done that by doing what I said prior, by having all of these people standing in solidarity saying you get our support if you accept X or if you accept Y. If Joe Biden accepts that, then Joe Biden has the ability to unify the party. Yes, you use leverage to do it. Yes, you forced his hand in doing it. But the fact that he was able to do that, you were able to use that level of political force and political leverage to get your will accomplished, means that if you are able to get those policy concessions, those lefties will potentially back Biden. But your issue is you don't want to do that because you know Joe Biden is not going to do that. You're trying to figure out how to get lefties without giving anything in return. If the Democratic Party is willing to entirely ignore accepting Medicare for all, be it in the House, be it in the Senate, or be it Joe Biden who's running this race, if that is indeed not going to be the main tip of the spear that the Democratic Party is willing to accept, Nancy Pelosi is talking about COBRA payments, then they don't deserve your support. Think about what we're saying for the moment. Democrats support Medicare for all to the tune of 88%. Look it up. Democrats support Medicare for all to the tune of 88%. Everyone else, if you include the rest of the country, that number still goes to 69%. That is an overwhelming majority of the country supports it during a pandemic. This will be your opportunity to get it accomplished because right now you have the lightning rod of public support from the standpoint of a medical crisis. If they're not willing to support that, how are you calling this a political process? Meaning, if you have a policy that the overwhelming majority of the public supports, 88% of Democrats, that is near unanimity in regards to support for Medicare for all. And the person who's going to win the nomination for the Democratic primary is not on board for it. The Democratic Party is not on board for it. If that is indeed true, then you have lost all contact with your political system and your political party. And you need to ask yourself, do you want to continue in the charade of playing as if you voting for these people is in some way giving you something back in regards to material remuneration? And beyond that, who are they actually supporting if indeed they're not supporting policy that a near unanimity of people support? Why do you continue to play this charade? That's my point. And if you really want to get anything real accomplished, you need to start engaging in real politics where you use leverage. Leverage requires numbers, which is why I keep making the point that lefties stand under this banner of Medicare for all as your tip of the spear in order to push for what you want. If they are not willing to accept a policy that 88% of Democrats support, then they deserve to lose until a candidate does. That's how politics works. And until you're willing to go there, nothing is going to take place in your political process from the standpoint of you getting those policies. Like,